Greetings, everyone. Welcome back to Blade Bias. Hopefully, you had a good holiday. If you celebrate Thanksgiving, go home and see the family, maybe eat a beautiful meal. I know I did, and it was awesome. And I also took a little bit of a break from Balisong stuff, so apologies for the lack of uploads. That also means that the Bally Awards voting is delayed a little bit, as I kind of expected it would be, but look for that hopefully along the lines of this week, because we're getting to the point where if I don't do it, then we're going to have to delay the show, and we don't want that. But speaking of things that are long awaited, this video is probably the single most requested Balisong that I have had in such a long time. And if we go over here past some members of my collection that we might be saying goodbye to, possibly, check my Instagram story if you're interested. We have an LDY Balisong yet again, because within this box comes all the rage lately. There are a lot of people singing this thing's praises, and I have not been interested in the slightest. The LDY Frank-P, the plastic version of the Frank. If you give me 1 second while I explain why I haven't been interested in this Balisong, I can pull up the specs to give you guys, because I actually don't know them. I have not been interested in this Balisong for one main reason. One, people asked about it so much that it just kind of got annoying to hear about. The Frank, the Frank, the Frank. And I get it. You guys want to see me talk about different Balisongs that come out that are exciting. Totally understandable. But the bigger reason is plastic has kind of been dead for me for a little while. I currently have what I consider to be my perfect plastic Balisong, minus durability, but the palette really does check every plastic box that I want. Again, minus durability. It's customizable. It has one of the best plastic balances that I have felt. And anything else that doesn't get satiated by that, Zippy comes in with the Cycloid HD. This thing is durable. It's solid feeling. It flips well. It's customizable in balance-wise. Not as perfect. Not as perfect in terms of balance, but it's still customizable enough in the balance to be enjoyable. And these two have really kind of killed plastic for me. I don't really look for anything else in plastic Balisong. So when LDY released their take on a plastic Balisong in the Frank-P, I just kind of wasn't interested. I knew it was cheap. I could get one really easily, but I also knew it would probably just sit in my collection. So every time someone asked, I would say, nope, no current plans to get one. But usually on stream, if someone asked, I would say, if LDY were to send me one, then obviously I would make a video on it. And that is ultimately what happened. I cannot find any specs on this thing. Interesting. Maybe specifications. Oh, Frank-P. Okay, it's in a completely separate thing. So this is a POM and titanium POM plastic with titanium plates and steel weights and pivots, coming in at 73.6 grams, which is 2.6 ounces. Okay. 2.6 ounces. Interesting. I believe this thing, I don't know for sure. I think they also talk about this thing being on bushings, which is really weird for a plastic Balisong, because all of the benefits of bushings, besides the fact that you can tighten it all the way, get taken away because plastic is so flimsy. So I don't really know how much that's going to affect things. I also can't even tell you exactly if it is on bushings or not. But this thing has been all the rage. Everyone is really hyping this thing up. And I just haven't been interested. I genuinely just haven't been interested. So I want to see if the hype is real. I want to see if this thing has been getting hyped up because it really is the best thing to happen to plastic. Let's give it a flip, LDY. This was sent to me for free by LDY, but they have not influenced me in any way. I actually didn't even know they were sending this to me until it was already halfway to me. So let's give it a flip. Okay. That first fan, I really wasn't impressed. And honestly, the fanning in general feels a little weird because it starts out being a very V-shaped fan, and then it kind of flattens out unless I'm just fanning it wrong. Okay, I'm becoming more and more impressed the more that I flip this. This is okay. This is a solid performer. It feels to me, is it binding at all? Maybe that's why the fans are weird. No, not much bind. It feels to me like a Squiddy, but good. The original Squiddy is a balisong that I consider to be an F tier plastic balisong. Unless you are a rollover only person, this thing fails as being a balisong for me simply because it can't fan. There is no tip weight. There is nothing to fan with. There's nothing to choker fan with. It doesn't carry fan momentum. It doesn't fan at all. And being someone who loves fans, I can't really flip a balisong that can't fan and have a ton of enjoyment. But even beyond that, the plastic is fragile. The handle bias is very heavy, and it just doesn't feel amazing to flip. I would go with any other plastic balisong over the Squiddy, which is why when people ask me, should I buy a Squiddy, I usually say no. The Frank-P feels like that Squiddy formula, but actually implemented well. It has the same kind of hard, shiny plastic that the Squiddy does. Not actually the same material, but kind of that same feel, as opposed to the more ridgy, textured, 3D printed feel that we've gotten so used to with plastic balisongs lately. I cannot comment on the durability of this plastic. I don't know if this is going to be something like the Squiddy where it's super fragile and it will break, if it's going to be a little more resilient like 3D printed stuff, or it's going to be super resilient like the stuff that the Squiddy B is made out of. But I kind of maybe feel like it might be a little less. I shouldn't comment because I can't. I don't know the strength of this POM plastic. POM plastic? I think that's actually what they use in Transformers. I feel like I've heard that before. I don't know. But the flipping experience honestly is quite good. So I'm getting not a lot of tip weight, surprisingly, because the fan kind of struggles to start, but once you set it in, it fans just fine. So it kind of tells me there isn't a ton of tip weight, but there's a little bit of tip momentum, where all of these steel rods in here are helping the blade carry more momentum, but not having as much in the tip is causing it to not feel as good in the beginning of a fan, but then it carries through the fan just fine. It feels kind of like those balisongs that when you chaplain on them, you're not sure if it's going to spin out at any random second. It feels like I shouldn't be able to fan this, but then it does exactly what I want it to do, especially in choker fans. When I fan a balisong, I kind of get the confidence of how well it's going to choker fan, because it's kind of the same momentum, same stuff like that. So with this thing, I fan and I lose a little bit of confidence that it's going to be able to do the full choker fan. And then I go into the choker fan and it does it almost flawlessly. This is a really, really satisfying choker fan, far more than it should be for how the fan normally feels. So that's actually quite impressive. And that's kind of why I initially didn't like it as much. But I'm now really starting to like it because it just choker fans really well. It choker fans way better than it should based on how the normal fan feels. The normal fan just feels like it's having a little bit of trouble getting started, but once it does get started, has no problem continuing. As for not so fan based tricks, everything else feels pretty good. 0Gs are sticky, normal rollovers are sticky. Chaplains are very, maybe not very sticky, but chaplains stick enough. It's obviously not going to be something like the OG Squiddy because that thing just sticks because of its handle bias. But it's certainly... No, I think ultimately the palette feels a little bit more stable. in its chaplain, but it's not bad by any means. It is very much still a confidence-inspiring chaplain. I don't feel like this is going to slide off or spin off. Grip. I think it's going to depend on who you are for grip. I seem to be slipping on it a lot. I think some people will say that this is super grippy. It's just kind of going to depend on what your preference for grip actually is. And then everything else, obviously, I think people hear bushings and they're like, oh, it's not going to tap. Obviously, still has tap. Obviously, is still going to have quite a bit of play. Because if this thing actually does have bushings, I highly doubt they are there to provide tolerances. They're more just there so you can tighten down the screws, which is pretty good. It is annoying to have to tune your plastic balisongs, I will agree. I don't really like tuning any washer balisongs. I like just tightening the screws down. So if that ultimately is what the story is there, then that's pretty cool. Overall, I'd say it's really solid for 30 bucks. I think that's what it was selling for on their website. $32.99. That is really, really solid performance for $32.99. Now, it's also a really good public flipper. It has a face, it's white plastic. The only thing that remains to be seen is how the durability is. So I think if you have a Frank-P, I want to know, where have you flipped it? What have you flipped it over, and how well has it held up? Because it's a little bit tough to do durability testing on a balisong that if it breaks, then I can no longer continue to make a video on it. So let me know how that goes. But yeah, very, very impressed here. I think we're in the realm of this being a genuinely good pickup for 30 bucks, especially when we're looking at something like the Fleur, which the Fleur is a balisong that I actually really love the balance of, but most of the other things about it, like the build and the weight, kind of drag it down a little bit. I don't really feel that dragging down effect with the Frank-P, but I also don't want to sit here and say it's the greatest plastic balisong ever. I think I ultimately do prefer the little bit of extra length that the palette affords me. However, you have to consider that this is $20 cheaper. So I think that's something that I'm going to have to think about over the next week or so that I spend with this thing, is how is the price affecting it. But I really do think right now, first impressions, this is a really solid pickup for $31. Is it in the realm of like, would I rather have this or stretch the extra like $15-ish to get a Canyon? I think that's going to depend on your personal preference and what you want it for. I think it's tough to recommend plastic as a beginner balisong, but maybe I'll make a video on that in the future. Honestly, I think it does hold its own. I don't think this is a case of like, hey, save $15 or spend $15 more and go with the Canyon. But I also don't think this is a Canyon killer in the sense where it's like, hey, save $15 from the Canyon and get a Frank-P. So overall, while I'm going to have to form my thoughts much more, first impressions, very impressed. I am not ready to give this the Plastic King title for me personally just yet, but I think that price is ultimately going to push me towards maybe giving it one of the higher positions on my list. Because even without the price, it does flip pretty well. I would say I enjoy flipping this more than something like my Chroma V3, or I don't know, maybe even my Cycloid V2, not my Cycloid HD. But it's incredibly well balanced. Doesn't feel too light. It feels sufficiently dense. I'm really impressed here, honestly. So yeah, I'm not ready to give this thing my Plastic King crown like everyone else seems to have just yet. But I will spend some more time with it and see what I think of it over the next few days. Thank you again to LDY for sending me this thing for these videos. And thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it so much. I finally did a video on the Frank-P. You guys can stop asking. I guess you can stop asking when I make the second follow-up video. But there it is, finally in hand. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Later.